Nice to meet you again, John.
Yeah, nice to see you, Mark.
For those who don't know John Faulkner, but I've worked with him historically when he was a strategic advisor to the board at Matrix Networks, a growing independent connection provider within the utility space. You've now gone back to your day job of being COO of infrastructure engineering firm Amey. Great to talk to you again. In terms of, I guess, to open up, an issue that continues to be ongoing within the broader infrastructure space as well as construction, etc., is around that of retaining and attracting various different skill sets. Amey employs some 11,000 people with a wide variety of skill sets needed to perform those roles. How are you tackling that issue at Amey, and what role are you playing yourself, John?
Yes, Mark, it's a good question. It's a significant challenge, both at sort of a macro level, just getting people into the business, looking after them. It's no longer just about how much you pay them. We have to make sure people have got meaningful roles in the business. They feel part of a team, they feel part of a belonging, but also that their reward is also elements of non-financial reward as well, making sure they know what they're doing. Amey invests quite heavily in investors in people. And that's our sort of North Star standard of making sure our people feel engaged and part of the business. And we use the IIP framework very much to keep our talent engaged. I think beyond that, young people is the other critical challenge in infrastructure. There's an aging workforce, an aging demographic. And so getting young people in and attracting people into engineering roles is probably the single biggest challenge that we have. One of the things we've been looking at and been doing over the last few years quite successfully is around how we use degree apprenticeships. We entered into a partnership with Sheffield Hallam University a few years ago, looking particularly at the rail market, because we were really struggling to find talent at a younger age career level. And bringing those guys in and girls in on a 5-year degree apprenticeship has been a real way getting people into that business and then giving them skills. So when they join Amey, they're not just coming with an academic background, but they're coming with some real life experience.
Yeah, it's building on that career, isn't it? There's a stigma around engineering, infrastructure, construction as a sort of vocation when you finish A levels or even before that at GCSEs, where parents want to push their children down a certain path, steer clear of infrastructure, engineering, construction. I guess grabbing them quite quickly, going through that apprenticeship with real life experience, it gets them ingrained and rooted in that industry.
Yeah, very much so. And engineering is no longer just putting an orange jacket on and a hard hat. We're dealing with data analytics. We're dealing with different parts of engineering. So what people think, perhaps when I grew up as a graduate in engineering, is a very, very different place. Having that wider appeal starts then to attract a wider demographic of people, particularly women. And we're seeing a huge amount of work through the STEM program, bringing women into engineering as well, which really helps make engineering relevant to the whole society.
Yeah, that neatly pulls into the next question around another massive challenge for the whole of this generation is around gaining net zero emissions within engineering, more broadly construction. And again, it does bleed into skill sets. I'm seeing it in some of the roles that I'm recruiting, the need for sustainability, innovation, etc. Within Amey, what kind of plans are you putting in place to really deliver that drive towards net zero and cutting down on emissions?
I think 5-10 years ago, net zero and sustainability was a sort of something that happened on the side. I think now it's absolutely core and central to business strategy. So I think in Amey, it's a multi-pronged approach, everything from making sure our board are educated on ESG priorities and net zero, so they understand what it means. I think secondly, having our own plans in place. We can't be selling the virtues of net zero to our clients unless we ourselves are leading the way with producing a net zero business. So Amey's set up for net zero by 2040, and by 2035, all our scope 1 and 2 emissions be net zero on that. So there's a huge amount of work in showing we're using electric vehicles, we're using responsible materials, we're really looking at all parts of Amey's life cycle and delivery through a net zero lens. And I think with that, that gives us credibility to go to our clients and start talking to them about how do we decarbonize the railway, how do we decarbonize the road network, how do we think differently about the built environment. So I think you need both things, but coupled with strong leadership and understanding of what that means to a business in the 21st century.
You've hit on a really relevant point. When I'm recruiting, aside in the building products, when I'm recruiting operations directors and you speak to them about how do you drive efficiencies through your business, be it from a commercial angle or from a plant angle, how do you start really driving a lean program? The lion's share of the time they respond with, it starts from the top. There's no point in trying to implement any kind of efficiency at ground level if you're not getting board input. So how you started answering that question, John, is very interesting for me. It starts from the top. Everyone needs to appreciate and understand what sustainability is.
It does, Mark, absolutely start at the sort of C-suite. And I think coming back into Amey at the start of the year, one of the first things we did is create a subcommittee of the main board, not the executive. It's looking wholly at the ESG agenda. And obviously that within the year, a big focus on carbon and decarbonisation. And I think if you can engage at that level, you can then start to have meaningful impact. So it becomes core to our business strategy, as I say, rather than something that just happens on the side. And I think that's a real focus for me over the next 12 months.
Interesting. Watch this space. I'll watch with interest. And in terms of from an efficiency angle, a real pressure across infrastructure, engineering, construction, etc., is continued squeezing of margins throughout the whole of the supply chain. Again, really interested to know what your view is as COO as well. It's probably core to your role. What new strategies, plans you're putting in place at Amey to ensure you are driving that efficiency and gaining as much out of the supply chain as you can?
Yeah, and I think Amey spends over £1 billion a year on its supply chain. Significant amount of spend. So as a client in our own right, we're a big client to a very large and diverse supply chain. And I think the days have gone of just looking for the best quote and the best price. It is not necessarily the same as best value. So we've embarked on quite a significant supply chain strategy that looks at how do we get the best out of our suppliers? How do we treat them as partners? How do we collaborate with them? And not assuming Amey has all the knowledge about what the right answer is, which we don't. So actually changing, if we can share our challenges that we perhaps get given from our clients with our suppliers, it helps them innovate better, come up with new ways of working. And I think increasingly that gets us to best value rather than just squeezing suppliers to do a bit more for a bit less. Clearly, we have competitive processes, and that's a cornerstone of good procurement. But it's not the only thing. It's now one attribute, but linked with that ability to collaborate and innovate. And suppliers and smaller companies generally innovate quicker and faster than big companies. They're more agile. They can take different risks. And I think it's how do we use that to make sure we're delivering better value to our customers.
And invariably, it's those startups, the SMEs that are growing. Excuse me, if they can forward plan with the likes of Amey, obviously a large business that's got a huge pipeline of project work ongoing, they know themselves, right? If we're partnering Amey, we know where our forecast is for the next year, 2 years, 3 years. We can now plan, we can now scale. It's a win-win, isn't it?
It is, and in Amey, where we choose to operate in the market is in long-term contracts. So we don't do short-term construction projects. We have contracts that span 5-7 years on average, and therefore we can work with our suppliers and give that longer-term certainty, so they can invest in us, they can work with us. So we're not just coming to them for a project on one day and then leaving them the next day. So that long-term duration helps build that loyalty and that collaboration to get to better value.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, good stuff. And you're providing a lot of services across government departments, the likes regulated industries, network rail, national highways agencies, etc. Again, there's significant costing issues in place for those governmental bodies. I'm guessing the efficiencies from Amey and the whole supply chain therefore bleed into the work you're doing with those regulatory bodies as well.
Yeah, and I've seen a shift. If you go back to the Great Recession of 2008, following the banking crisis, the kind of language in government then was, squeeze the suppliers, bringing suppliers in, seeing how much more we could take out of them. And I think now, the government realizes that's not a sustainable strategy, and therefore they see innovation as a way of delivering more for less, and that's critical because the signals they give to the market is all important. So if they're telling a story of more innovation, more creativity, challenging the existing ways of doing things, then I think we have a chance to deliver better value and more for less. And we're seeing some innovations in some of our key markets, whether that's in national highways, turning upside down how maintenance is carried out, going from scheduled ways of doing things on a monthly basis, weekly basis, into using more data, more insight, and digital maintenance techniques. So we only intervene when we need to. And that's that has to be done safely, and we have to take the clients with us. But it's only those kind of approaches that will sort of change and bring us sort of a step change in the cost base of delivering core programs like maintenance.
Interesting. An awful lot of innovation throughout this conversation, to be fair, and it's I mean, it brings in skill sets, it drives efficiencies, and it makes the industry that we're both part of a far more interesting place to work within as well. So.
Completely, and innovation's a bit of a can be a bit of a buzzy word, but innovation to me has to focus on real world challenges, and with that real world challenge, there needs to be political support, there needs to be leadership from the top, there needs to be an awareness of safety. But you're going to those things with a real life challenge rather than let's just innovate and do something differently. So if you could ground that in the realities of fixing and solving challenges, then I think the supply chain can really stand up, and companies like Amey can really help deliver things in new ways.
Interesting. Very interesting talking to you, John. I appreciate you taking time out.
No problem at all. Nice to speak to you, Mark.
Thank you. Thanks, John.